get the camera further wrong. We'll just go with the
How are you? Come on in. I'm getting ready to start. Give you a big hug. Hey, Kim. How are you? Good. All right. Hey. Okay, so
You want to turn the camera off and not worry about it?
which Kim? I'm sorry.
The only camera that's functioning is here on my laptop instead of the room camera where they can see.
I'm just, oh, okay. I don't know. Which is better?
Say it loud, okay. I'm
Right now, they're like right here.
Okay, so I'll move here.
Is that good? Okay.
Where are you, darling? How are you?
I've been a busy.
I know. It's kind of crazy. So.
Hello. Okay. You're
Okay,
good. I'm
so-
sorry about that.
Is that a little better? Okay, so it's coming up, low system resources may affect your audio quality. Okay, I'm gonna let that go. All right, so. Welcome, welcome, welcome. As I said, basic community agreements that I always like to work with is honor and respect. That's deeply embedded in my Haitian tradition. My family is from Haiti. And so we have a call and response that when someone says honor, the response is respect. And so we understand that there may be some things that you don't agree with. Someone may ask a question that you may think like, that doesn't make sense. Why? Right? But we're gonna allow ourselves to engage with an openness, an open mind, open heart, open spirit, so that we can have an enjoyable time together. So today we're going to be looking at belonging and alienation, which I think is at the core in understanding spiritual traditions and religions. I'll be also discussing my life growing up in the DMV as a child of the 70s and 80s. And we'll watch my short film, Brooklyn to Benin, a Voodoo Pilgrimage, and then we'll have a discussion and Q&A. And so since we have a little bit more folks on the Zoom, I'll ask if you can just check in for it, because I won't be able to check in. So if there's questions or things that come up. So I'm gonna talk for a little bit. If you have questions, feel free to put it in the chat. If something that I say sparks like something that's like, hey, I want to know more, type it out. And then when we get to the points of questions, we will engage. So I want to start with acknowledgements, because for me to be here with you today, it was not possible for me to be here with you today without the tremendous influences of these people. So the first is my Aunt Rosemary. The second is the great Zora Neale Hurston. My undergraduate alma mater, Bowie State University, which is where I really started my research. And I received funding and I received support. I published my first paper. Nana Kwabena Brown, who is a traditional Akan priest in Washington, D.C., is a tremendous, powerful person and loving person, but also a trailblazer in the 1970s of he and his family being traditionalists and opening up a traditional Akan temple called the Temple of Inyame in Washington, D.C. Also, Iya Oshunyoyinalake, one of my friends, but also someone who's taught me a lot about the Yoruba tradition. And then the last person I put on there is Dr. Deborah Willis. Now, only two of these people are ancestors. Only two are ancestors, and the others are still living. I call it Dr. Deborah Willis, one, if you didn't know, she is a phenomenal photographer and historian. Most of the books that you will find on Blacks and photography and the history, many of them have been written by her. She also received her PhD from George Mason University Cultural Studies program. And so I had a chance to work as a set photographer on one of her film projects. And so I'm very much honored to have worked with her. So this is the title of the presentation. And so I'm going to start with a little bit of poetry. And this is a poem by Iya Osunyoyin Alake. And she says, I poured libation in Brooklyn, in Weeksville, where love for each other, care of each other, and support of each other were the community cornerstones. I beg Oshun to return those gifts to us. She too tells me to wait. She says that love and fear can't sleep in the same house, much less the same bed. But the time of courage is coming. Her waterfall of wisdom whispers into my ear. Oshun says, love, love again, and then love more. Love is our legacy. Feed everyone's soul with love, and so it can grow in its power. And that is Ritual in Waiting. I love that poem. And I wanted to start with this poem because a big part of the way in which traditional African religion has survived has been through the oral tradition. It has been through the oral tradition of people taken against their will from places across the Atlantic, countries, nations across the Atlantic. And they came in such horrid conditions, right? Through the transatlantic slave trade. But if you can think about that horrific history, and then we think about the place in which we have someone who is half of, her heritage, descendant of Jamaican, and knowing the history of Jamaica and the United States, very much similar, because Jamaicans, many of them were taken against their will, and the drop-off was just different places. So whether we were dropped off here in the southern plantations, whether we were dropped off in Haiti, whether we were dropped off in Brazil, African people were taken against their will and were forced to exist, right? Many exist within chattel slavery. Many, I will highlight that many became Maroons and left, and they went into the mountains, they went up into the hills, and their form of rebellion is one in which every single island or aspect in the United States, there were always Maroons, and they were always wanted, right? They were always trying to catch them, but there were many Maroon societies in the southern parts of the United States and also throughout the Caribbean. But what I mentioned is that we have someone who is descended from that experience, as we know, who ran for president. So to go from descended from chattel slavery to now running for president, right? So that's something to consider in the sense of shift and change. Now, the two words that I said that I would define are belonging and alienation. So belonging means an affinity for a place or situation, and alienation is a loss or lack of sympathy, estrangement, the state or experience of being isolated from a group or an activity to which one should belong, which one wants to involve. In Marxist theory, which is quite a bit of what I study in cultural studies, it's a condition of workers in a capitalist economy resulting from a lack of identity with the products of their labor and a sense of being controlled or exploited. So Marxist theory is always always interesting to interrogate through the lens of Black and brown people, because actually Marx did not really address our circumstances. And so there are other theorists later that really dug into how to take Marxist theory to the present day. But that's not what we're talking about today. So I wanted to highlight these two because this is very much a big part of my own, the complexity of my own identity. So there's a photograph on the left-hand side that looks like it came from the 1800s. It did not. It is from the 1970s in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. And as a young child, I was born in the United States, and as a young child, I went back and forth to Haiti while my parents were dealing with what it meant to be an immigrant in the Washington, D.C. Area. And I am the smaller person, and then the larger person is my sister. And on the other side is a photograph of me in Brooklyn, New York, which Brooklyn has been my home for over 20 years. Yeah, since 1999. And so there's this place in which who I was as a young person and who I was able to become, it meant that I had to deal with aspects of alienation to eventually find my place of belonging, right? And so what does that mean? In the 1970s, my first language was Creole, second was French, and my third language that I learned was English. So very much like some of your students, some of your colleagues, some of your classmates, I am an English language learner, right? I've come pretty far because I was someone that always loved being in school. My favorite place, and actually the only place that my parents felt very comfortable with allowing me to go on my own, was the library. And so, as we know, many immigrants come to the United States and they have different fears, they have different places in which they are trying to understand, but also trying to protect their family. Some of that has to do with their immigration status. Some of that has to do with their fears of what they've heard before they came, right? So there's stereotypes and biases for immigrants coming to the United States, and then there's stereotypes and biases against those that are coming. So I was in the middle of that situation. When I told folks in my town, which was Laurel, Maryland, that I was from Haiti, people were like, what? Where's that? Huh? People actually thought I said Tahiti. And I was like, no, Haiti, right? And so another part for me of a particular type of alienation that I felt was when I began to see images of Haitians on the mainstream media. And I began to see images of Haitians in the mainstream media in the 1980s, because at that time there was what they called a Haitian boat crisis, right? So there were lots of Haitians leaving the country, and they were leaving in a perilous condition on boats and rafts that were really not well made, and they were trying their best to get to the United States by any means necessary. Those circumstances echo what's happening today, right? For the most part, we know that there is a rise of immigrants that are coming into the country, and there's all types of political debates about their legitimacy, and their value, and the desire to engage with the immigrant community. So I've always seen myself as a part of the Haitian community, though in Laurel at the time, there were not really many people. So it was very much connected to my family, and then connected to African Americans. And so for me, moving from that place of, in my home, we spoke Creole and French. And as I started going to school, my siblings and I, we started bringing in more English. And so what happens with a lot of immigrant third culture kids is that you lose your first language, because now the language in which you are now educated becomes the predominant language. And so English became the language in which I spoke the most. And so with that comes all of the learnings, right? And recognizing that there are places of bias. So this is just a little bit about me. This was at my first exhibition. I am a photographer. I am a visual anthropologist. I'm a mother. My daughter is a grown woman. She's 32 years old. And I'm a sister, racial justice strategist, scholar, author, and now PhD student at George Mason University. So I want to bring into the space the work of Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, because I think that his concept of double consciousness plays a big part in how I was growing up. But I kind of had a triple consciousness, in a sense, that I was seen as Black or African American. I identified with that because I was that, but then also identified with the Haitian culture and Haitian identity. And so from that emerged who I am. So Du Bois says that it is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, the sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others. of measuring one's soul by the tape of the world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. One ever feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body, whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. Now, Du Bois wrote that in The Souls of Black Folks, and when I read it, the first time I read this was when I was a student at Bowie State University. So if there are any undergraduate students, I want you to know that what you are studying right now can and will influence you 30 years later. It can carry you. So what sparks an interest, that place in which you're like, well, I thought I was gonna be this major, but now I think I'm gonna be this, follow it. Follow what keeps you interested. Follow what brings you joy. So for me, I was kind of really digging into lots of stuff about Black people, African people, the African diaspora. I was learning all of these words. I was learning about Zora Neale Hurston and then her work, and then it just like opened up a whole new world for me. And one of the reasons why I decided to go to a historically Black college is because I understood that as long as I was living in the United States, that I would be seen as Black, as African American. It would be a secondary thing for someone to learn of my Haitian heritage, but upon seeing me and how I present, that's how people would take me. And I said, well, if I'm going to be seen as that, and if my, my identity, my passport and my driver's license says that this is what I am, then what does that actually mean? And I wanted to dig into learning about Black history, Black culture, because it was often something that wasn't discussed. There was this separation. In the 1970s and 1960s, many of the immigrants that were coming from the Caribbean to the United States were coming for work. Now, of course, there were those that had large sums of money and could come back and forth, but for the most part, the migration in the 60s and 70s was because of work. And specifically in Haiti, it was because many people were trying to leave the dictatorship of Papa Doc. And so what did that mean? That meant that very well-educated Haitians were leaving Haiti, which was different than the 80s crisis, where it was a lot of poor people who were leaving and were risking their lives on getting on these rickety boats. In the 1960s and 70s, there was a mass migration of Haitians that were educated, that were making the choice, that were trying to find a way to be in the United States, but also still be in Haiti. But because of the regime at the time, there was a lot of fear. And so there was this mass exit. And so with that, there were quite a few people that were able to come into the United States at that time. But when they came to the US, their ideas of Black people, their ideas of who we are or they are, was based on a lot of stereotypes. In the same way that we have heard tons of stereotypes from the president-elect to others about Haitians, we can see that that history is not new. I'm gonna come back to this slide. And I want, oh, sorry. I'm sorry. This one's, so I'm gonna play this, but before I play this, and I am gonna play the film. I know you're like, please play the film. She's talking a lot. But I want to give this little bit of preamble in the sense of what my interests were. So as an undergraduate, I made my first trip to to Ghana. I was supposed to go to Haiti, but Haiti was experiencing an embargo under Clinton, right? And so I had a research fellowship, the Ronald E. McNair Baccalaureate Fellowship, but I was not able to go. And so I ended up going to Ghana. And then when I went to Ghana, I went and studied the traditional ancestral beliefs of the Akan people. So from 1994 to 2024, I've been doing this work, this research. And so I want to show this, I want to share this video with you because I want us to just look at it and explore something known as syncretism. So I want you to take a look at this, and then in the comments or here, we can talk about what we see. So I want you to look at, what is it that you see? What is it that you hear? And what is it that you are, that you'd like to know, right? So those are the three questions. So we're just gonna take a look at this. And as we dig in, hold on a second, let me go back. And I do want you to know that there is an accent, right? And we all have accents, so you gotta tune in just a little bit more, okay?
Let me make sure you're sharing sound too.
Oh, yes. Ooh, look at that. Thank you. Oh, yeah, we need to do that. 'Cause I'm gonna show my phone.
I want to pray for my friends and you watching me right now. Every garment of shame and problem covering your life catch fire in Jesus' name. Amen. Every dark eyes monitoring your life and destiny in Jesus' name. Amen. Every satanic power monitoring never to do well, monitoring your life never to do well, catch fire in Jesus' name. Amen. So shall it be in Jesus' name. Amen.
Okay, so what'd you see? What'd you hear? What do you want to know? Right? We have a young prophet in the making. Yes,
It looks like she was pouring libations.
exactly. It looks like she was pouring libation, right? Pouring libation with olive oil.
Lemon, was it olive oil?
Olive
On the
oil.
top?
Yeah,
I couldn't
exactly.
tell
Just
if
a
it was
little bit,
lemon.
just a little bit of olive oil. Yes. I'm sorry, are there comments in the?
No, not yet. And then you all should be able to open your microphones. We should be able to hear you as well. So I'm
Okay,
watching
yeah.
the chat and too, if you put it in the chat.
Yeah, so if anyone's there in the Zoom, if you want to come on the mic and just tell us what you saw, if there's anything that you want to know.
And she was casting out evil.
Exactly, right? So, so one of the reasons I want to share that, because one, it made me smile and laugh, but it also illustrates this place in which there's this syncretism, and syncretism in traditional African religion basically is like this merging of either Christianity or Islam with something else, right? So with merging of traditional African practices within the face or the outward facing of Christianity. So even as she's pouring libation and is, talking about, I want to bless, my friends and those of you watching today. I mean, she looked like she has a big following, right? I need to find her on TikTok. And also just like she's so serious. So it looks like something deeply embedded, but there's two things, right? So there's the Christianity that's there, and then there's the other part that's there, which is the pouring of libation, and which is, they're not necessarily the same, right? And so when we think about the survival of traditional African religion in the Americas, we have to also understand that there is a place in which syncretism happened. Yes.
How long has this technique been utilized across the African diaspora? Because I'm thinking of like multiple different examples where it's like, okay, I can see it in this, I can see it in this, I can see it in this thing, but then I'm like, can it count with something that isn't necessarily like religious or spiritual?
Right.
I guess that's just.
Yeah, I mean, it happened as soon as there was violence, right? Think about this, right? For us to be in this room today, we all came from different roads. But somewhere within our collective ancestry, there was violence against traditional ways. And so what happened? It meant that many people had to hide their powers, their knowledge, and their way of being. Because if they did not, within the system of chattel slavery throughout the Americas, they would be killed, they would be maimed, they would deal with public lashings. If you investigate the Black codes, les codes noirs, which were the codes that the French used, right? But there were also codes that were used in the United States. about how to manage the slaves. And one of the most significant ways was to take the place of our mind. And our mind in that of ingraining them with religious doctrine that told them that the Bible says that slavery is, is not a bad thing, and that they should be a good slave. So in that, and with the public execution of anyone that was not following that. But here's something I want us to consider. The Industrial Revolution that took over the United States, that really gave the rise for capitalism, is indebted to traditional African religion. That's quite a thesis, isn't it? In which way is the Industrial Revolution beholden to Black and brown people's traditional? So I'll answer that and then we'll go, yes.
I was just saying, there's a question or a comment from the chat. I'm curious about what cultural elements, parenting styles inspire such confidence. She seemed empowered to speak with certainty, confidence, and purpose.
Absolutely, right? And so one of the things is for the young girl, and I don't know her name, this is often what happens in social media, that things get moved around and moved around and moved around, and then all of a sudden we see something. But one, she absolutely is speaking with authority, right? She has a level of confidence that we all hope that we could. Her prayers sound like it's gonna happen, right? So if you ever feel any doubt, you just need to listen to that and feel good. But there is this place of confidence for her in the sense that she's clear that both are significant. She's saying in Jesus' name, but she's pouring libations. And libations are often poured to ancestors within traditional African religion or to other deities, right? And so for many, Jesus is an ancestor. If you believe that he came, lived, and died, then at the core, Christianity is ancestor worship. Now, of course, a lot of people don't see that because they see that Jesus is the Son of God. But then if we all are made in God's image, then we're all sons and daughters of God, right? And then if Jesus did come and live and die, then it's ancestor worship, right? Oh, that's another conversation.
I've seen in my one trip to Ghana, a mixture, the same thing of, white Jesus.
Yes.
Worship, but when there was a problem in the community, they go to their traditional,
Healer.
the traditional
Priest.
practices.
Yeah, the traditional practices, traditional priests. And so the thesis that I put forward is that the Industrial Revolution is beholden to voodoo, to the Orishas, to all of that, because I want you to think about something. So for enslaved Africans that were dealing with horrific situation, there was no union, right? There was no doctor that was out there taking care of them. There wasn't anyone necessarily speaking up for them. When they became sick, when they were raped and had children that were not with their partners, the midwifery, the lashes, how were they cared for?
Each other.
And in what way? With each other, but in what way?
Tradition.
What tradition?
Midwifery.
Huh?
They knew at home, midwifery, the herbal tradition, what they knew from the land, what they knew from their past tradition from home.
Exactly. And so their past tradition from home is tied to traditional religion. It is tied to their traditional spiritual beliefs. So for instance, there are many, many accounts of this in which you can find where people talk about that they didn't know the herbs in the land. They may have looked similar, but how did they get to know that this herb or this plant would heal? Because they turned to their dreams. Because their ancestors spoke to them in dreams, right? So even though it's like, what are you talking about? Dreams, this and that. But I want you to think, how did these people survive? if they were treated in an inhumane fashion and they were just seen as, they were seen as property, but they were treated in such a horrible way, they were caring for each other, and how they held each other was within their tradition. And even though their tradition would, if they publicly displayed elements, right? They could be killed, they could be maimed, they could be lashed out in public, or, you know, all types of things to try to get people not to. The reality is that those traditions are what helped most of us, even in this room, if we believe it or not, it was those traditions that allowed them to survive for us to be here today. It was not Christianity. It was not the doctors, Western medicine. No, these people had to heal themselves. They had to figure it out. And so the place in which syncretism occurred, it occurred as soon as we landed, as soon as we were told that we could not do this, but that's actually what was keeping us alive. So I'm gonna keep going. I'm gonna come back to that. So the work of Bell Hooks, I find is important because she's a brilliant woman, and she talks about the place in which cameras gave to Black people, irrespective of our class, a means by which we could fully participate in the production of images, right? And so for myself as a photographer and filmmaker, her work is significant. Gordon Parks, he said that he saw the camera as a weapon against poverty, racism, against all sorts of social wrongs. And he says that I knew at that point I had to have a camera. And so for me, when I think about these great people, that they knew we have agency through these images, I said, well, I wanna work with that. I wanna be a photographer. So this is me on the set of Deborah Willis's film with Thomas Allen Harris, and this is with Deborah Willis's work, which is a phenomenal book. If you don't have it, you wanna get it, which is a history of Black representation in photography. And that's the work of Deborah Willis. So I'm going to skip just a little bit, and I'm gonna get to the film. So, and I'll talk about these later. These are other projects that I've worked on. And these are the 4 questions that I want us to dig into as we watch the film. So the first is, what do I see? What do I hear? What do I feel? And what do I wanna know? I'm going to show the film now. It's about, it's less than 8 minutes. And then we're gonna come back to these questions, and then I'll reshare some of those slides so that we can, you know, engage.
Mika kwa bia na ikungwa jini leo. Mika kwa bia ni chinukusu. Mika kwa bia sanfon weji. Mika kwa bia lo bada weji. Mika kwa bia lo kunzame. Mika kwa bia lo koboli kwe. Mika kwa bia lo kumbona ko kwa le fiobi. Mika kwa bia lo kumbona to sa fiobi. Mika kwa bia ntasi no lo to sa fiobi. Mika kwa bia si ko ji ejijo. Mika kwa bia na hosu lo to le fiobi. O kan kwa bia si ko ji ejijo. Mika kwa bia ni budu bato. Mika kwa bia ni budu siyon. Mika kwa bia ni zunto. Mika kwa bia se ko isa kwa luku kwa.
A daughter born on the other side of the water returns, delving into depths of an ancient cascade of memory, myth, and magic. The transatlantic slave trade, with its forced migration of millions of Africans taken out of their homes and into the New World, brought with them their traditions and their gods. Voodoo is a religion. Voodoo is a spiritual practice. It is an ancient traditional West African religion that originates with the Fan of Benin and the Ewe of Togo.
Dambala Wejo, c'est bon, c'est bon. Aïda Wedo, c'est bon, c'est bon. Dambala Wedo, c'est bon, c'est bon. Aïda Wedo, c'est bon, c'est bon. Les mammouths échouent, moi, mon ka crié. Les mammouths échouent, moi, mon ka relé. Les mammouths échouent, moi, mon ka crié. Dambala Wedo.
Vodou derives from the Fon language expression of vo bo don, which means draw energy from the source of creation fearlessly, and to honor your God fearlessly. My travels in Benin from Savalu to Ouida explore the depths, the connections that Vodou has to nature, and the divinity that we have within ourselves. The spiritual practices of Vodou are grounded in a monotheistic faith with intermediary deities, angels, spirits, lois that serve as guides for humans. The spirits were created by the Almighty to communicate with humans on a regular basis. The spirits can be contacted through possession and divination. And at such time, they offer messages, warnings, and blessings from the spiritual world. Vodou is an action plan, a spiritual and physical guide to everyday survival. For every aspect of the human condition, there is a path, and Vodou offers a guide.
Papa kò bí lápọ̀ ó gbé àpòpọ̀ kú ìgbé àṣà ìgbédágbé tí sọ̀gbé àlọ́dí rẹ̀.
Vodou was here before me, and it will be here after me. I pay my respects to the ways of my ancestors, give thanks that we have not lost our sacred knowledge, traditions, songs, and dances. Vodou, c'est bon. Aïe bobo.
It's a long list.
Oh, my name is.
It sure was. Okay, so before we get to this, just. Let's go back to these questions. What do I see, hear, feel? What do I want to know? So I put that out to the audience. I put that out to all of you here and folks online, whoever's still online with us. Yeah.
So we can ask questions?
Yeah.
So, are they speaking, what language are they speaking?
Fon. Fon.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Fon is, Fon is a language of Dahomey, and Dahomey doesn't exist anymore, but it used to. So there's parts of Benin that were a part of the Dahomey Empire, and then part of it that's now in Nigeria, right? So when the British and the French fought over Africa, and it was more than just the British and the French, but they were divided arbitrarily, which means that there were nations. And I try to use the word nations rather than tribes, because I find that tribes is always used for people of color, but it's never used for white people. And I don't think that's fair, because there's a lot of stereotypes that come with it, right? So when we think of tribe, we immediately think of an indigenous group, but all groups are indigenous to where they're from, right? Like on some level, right? So I prefer to say nations. And so nations were divided. Where that line came and it was like, oh, this is now Nigeria, was, tons of people. So what happened, for instance, you can see this really when you think about Senegal and Gambia, that within Senegal, there's a country, Gambia, because the British fought for it. So they are Wolof, but they speak English because the British hold that. And so it's enclosed, right? They're landlocked. And Senegal was then controlled by the French. So, but they're one nation, one group of people, but now have different ways of operating because of the colonial influences. Yeah.
I'll say that as I was listening and even looking at the title of the presentation, for her saying voodoo repeatedly, or voodoo, trying to pronounce
yeah.
the same way, for the Christian in me and those being raised around, I could imagine people hearing voodoo, reading on here. And thinking,
Exactly.
what is this about? What's happening? And, having an anxiety, a fear just embedded with
Exactly.
contextually that attribute of faith.
Absolutely. I know that when I shared it with my students, there was like crickets when I told them, you all are welcome. And one, I understand because the population here is largely Muslim and also largely Christian, right? And so there's this place in which, like, what are we talking about? Like, no. And it's always interesting for me because when we think about civilization, when we say that civilization began on the continent of Africa, what do you think that your ancient ancestors were doing? It was not Christianity and it was not Islam. It wasn't Buddhism. And really, in many ways, if we cannot respect the mother, because that is what traditional African religion is, it is the mother. It is the mother tradition, and all religious traditions derive from it. So the reverence that we have for Mary, right? The reverence that we have for different biblical characters, for many, understanding that those stories came from Northeast Africa. That's where they originated. The Coptic Christians, the Ethiopians, hold sacred texts that they hold to be true, and that many Catholic and Orthodox go to Ethiopia to be ordained.
Putting it in context from a popular culture perspective in film and movies in particular, thinking about the practice of voodoo as a faith, it's often bastardized and created as a sense of fear mongering about the faith. Because if I were to see like what that young woman was doing with the little, what do you call it when you have like a little space, but
Yeah.
and whether throwing water on it or whatever it may be doing.
Yes,
Because of what I've seen in films, you know, there's a film called Angel Heart with Lisa
Exactly.
Bonet from years ago, a lot of voodoo elements in that.
yes.
Films of that nature have me instantly fearful of like, are they putting a root on me? Some sort
Exactly.
of curse that's being put on my family or?
Exactly,
Yeah,
right.
so I mean, it's, when we look at it with popular culture, how we can taint our perspective of others' practices versus really trying to engage and understand them.
Yeah.
And we have a question online from
Okay.
Scott. Scott, did you want to open your mic and see if we can hear you?
Yeah, are y'all able to hear me?
We can hear
Yes,
you.
hi.
All right, perfect. Hi, Regine. First off, I wanted to say, wow, that was really cool to watch. I love that.
Thank you.
It was really interesting. You know, I'll try not to take up too much time, but I had actually taken like an African film class back during undergrad, and it's been such a long time since I've really seen like a true depiction of like, you know, African people and their practices really on film.
Yes.
So that was really, really nice to watch. Especially that last shot was just like absolute cinematic beauty for the record. I really love that. But what I wanted to say off of kind of what Dr. Craig was talking about is, do you have an idea of like what you consider to be the best depiction of voodoo in film and TV from your perspective?
It's a mixed bag. It's a mixed bag for me. I can't say, there's some books that I think, that may offer. And you know, I will say that, when I think about the work, for instance, of Zora Neale Hurston was studying anthropology at Columbia University. But her work was rife with bias also. So though she is one of my ancestral mentors, right, in the sense of the field of anthropology and the field of research specifically, when I read Tell My Horse, I can see the places in which she is using language that is deeply embedded in anthropology. And anthropology was started really by wealthy white men that wanted to go and see the world. And they were able to pay for their passage on ships and go with, you know, these different types of, you know, situations and go and to see and then come back, and they had the leisure to write extensively. But when you look at those old ledgers, when you look at what the writing was, it was rife with the ideas of the period of enlightenment, right? So Kant, Hume, Hegel, all of those folks who said that the white was superior and the Negro was not really quite a man, right? So many of those early anthropologists took those ideas of Europe's period of enlightenment, and when they went and saw Black and brown people, they continued to carry that thought and to continue to write with that narrative. So part of the role for me, I would say, is to create a counter narrative, a counter Black diaspora narrative. And I don't know, I think there's a mixture of scenes. There's things that come up that I love. Like there's parts, like if you ever watched American Gods, have you watched any of that? Right? So there's parts of it that were so powerful, like, wow, right? But then in the sense of how it was told overall, when you hear who was the writer of this season, and then who became the writer of season later, and why the stories shift, because a big part of what makes a difference is who is sitting at the table. Who is writing the script? Who's actually they've done the research. So for instance, many people, when they talk about music and they talk about, like Robert Johnson, right? Going out and making a deal with the devil. And that's why he wasn't seen. And when he came back, he'd all of a sudden could play the guitar, like in this mysterious way. They were like, what happened? Like, where did he get that talent from? Right? And so when we think about that story of the devil, often because of the Christian perspective, the deity of Eshu or Legba is often seen as the trickster god and often considered and made into the devil, right? So even when we go to the work of Beyonce, which I had here, and thinking about the modern context, right? So when we think about what's happening today, the music a lot of her music. She has made references to Oshun, Yemaya, Ogun, the whole Lion King interpretation of her album, her Black is King, what was rife with imagery of South African spiritual traditions, of Yoruba, Orisha traditions. And I think it's interesting because there is a wave, there's this resurgence of interest where everybody wants to be a witch, right? And so I think when my daughter was younger, there was a show called Charmed. Does anybody know that show? Yeah.
Sister loved it.
Before, what'd you say?
My sister was obsessed with Charmed. It was always
Oh,
on.
exactly. Okay, so then there was Charmed, right? And when I was a kid, there was a show called Bewitched. That's from the 60s, right? So when we think, so let's think about this. There's tons and tons of media, films, images, stories about magic, about power, right? But I want you to think about in the sense of how are Black people portrayed within that space? Yes.
Couple of, just keeping notes. One, when you talk about Zora Neale Hurston and the idea with where she was learning this from, we're dealing with ethnography in our
Yes.
research methods class and understanding like when you take on something of that nature, you're coming from a place of privilege and being careful about how you're placing judgment upon those bodies, those groups, those communities
Yes.
that you're observing. So to your point, historically, that was not really readily considered and taken into account.
Exactly.
And then when you talk about Robert Johnson and the story and the devil, you know, there's also the moment in the Bible where Jesus disappears for a while. He's gone. And in that he's tempted by the devil. So there's a likeness
Yes.
of, you know, what Jesus went through to the story of Robert Johnson. But evidently Robert Johnson, through his brown body, is
Mhm.
tempted by the devil, at least from the
Right.
tales that we
Exactly.
understand they're recording.
Right.
So it's always interesting how we place ideas or concepts upon certain bodies.
Mhm.
And then the last couple of things, when you talk about us adopting or just that space of carrying the traditions, but also having to survive in this new world for our ancestors, for the slaves, those that made it through and were able to continue on. That is where we get into intercultural talking about acculturation, where some of us, we adopt by keeping what we know, but then having to adopt new. Some of us just get rid of what we know, we assimilate, we completely integrate into it, like
Exactly.
forget what we knew. This is, you know, I liken that to that's the Uncle Tom, what people would call the Uncle Tom. He's just
Right.
bootlicking and doing everything that the new people say to do. Some of us separate. The Maroons, like you were describing, they're
Exactly.
like, we're not having any part of this. We gonna go off in our
We're
own
going to the
way.
hills.
And so it's really important for us to appreciate those differences or those ways in which we try to survive and those that did manage through acculturating and still maintaining some attribute of their previous identity for us to be able to still carry on and
Absolutely.
experience. And then the last one is just because you were bringing it up, you talk about witchery is coming back around again because right now, one of my son's favorite shows we watched, because it's part of Marvel, the Agatha All Along, and I'm watching like this is a whole tribute to witches. and basically saying we appreciate witches or we can respect or, you know, I love the storyline. And so I, you know, for one, I definitely appreciate you saying it in terms of how it comes back around, it cycles around
Absolutely.
and demonstrates an appreciation if we want to have an appreciation for
Yeah.
something.
I mean, even when we think about Harry Potter, right? Like Harry Potter, it was a school, right? A school for witches, right? And it made millions of dollars from the books to then becoming film, to all of the paraphernalia that was sold, and it was okay. It was okay. But then I want us to go from Harry Potter, and then I want us to dig in a little bit to Disney.
Yeah, I was just gonna let you know there's another comment or Scott wanted to chime in.
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, sure.
Go ahead,
I,
Scott.
I bet you were already gonna go there. I was literally about to say, like, I wonder what your thoughts were on Princess and the Frog then.
Oh, you know, I don't, because my daughter was older, I didn't see that. But what I was gonna reference was two.
Interesting.
I was, so me, you know, watching a lot of that is dependent on the age of my child. But my daughter loved The Lion King, the version before Beyonce and Daniel Glover, and Mulan. Now, the first Lion King and Mulan were very, very different. They're very different. They both were dealing with cultures outside of the United States, but how those cultures were dealt with were different. Now, because Disney decided to do this Lion King story and make it East Africa, right? So Swahili was spoken like Hakuna Matata, which means easy, no worries, right? And dealing with that. But when it came to places where the spiritual person in the story, right, the baboon, I think, when he was talking or giving wisdom, it was a lot of kind of mumbo jumbo. There was nothing that you saw that would make you feel alarmed and think that that was voodoo. But then when we go to Mulan and we're looking at this young girl who is breaking the law because she's about to put on her father's uniform and go and masquerade as a man, where does she go before she goes? Where does she go?
Temple.
She goes to the ancestor shrine. She goes and lights incense and calls on her ancestors and she says, protect me. I know I'm doing wrong, but I don't want my father to die. He's an old man. And then what did her ancestors do? They sent a spirit to protect her, the character of Eddie Murphy. I know I'm going back. You may not even know what I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking about.
You know what I'm talking about? Right, so he was like the comedic element, but he was a ghost. He was an ancestor. Why was it handled in that way? I just want us to think about that. Lion King, Black people, African culture, kind of not, right? And then Mulan, Chinese culture, Buddhist tradition, and fully temple shrine, ghost flying. Why is that? Why? Anybody from the Zoom, you know, just what are your thoughts? What is the reason for that? Yes, sir.
No, go ahead.
I'm was gonna tie into something else, gonna point out earlier when you put in those first few questions, because one of the how they define or how you defined voodoo, put emphasis on the word fearless, and that it was a fearless worship of nature and the natural world around just well, so obviously the ancestors and stuff like that. Not to try to generalize or anything like that.
Right.
And it made me think about learning about like the Haitian Revolution and how voodoo, in particular, hope I'm saying it right.
Yes.
Okay, how voodoo in particular was such a key spiritual weapon utilized against the French, against the British, against the Spanish, because it gave them not necessarily like rules, but like guidelines in a way. It gave them somebody to communicate with or people to communicate with on like how to deal with this force, this enemy.
Yes.
And they spoke specifically to like gods of war. And I guess I'm gonna say combat, because I'm limited in my knowledge of who, that's why I'm here, because it is interesting. But like, and taking that, understanding the result of the Haitian Revolution, the aftermath of that, and then taking it to like the pop culture sense, because like for me, I love like my pop culture binge a lot is like anime, like power fantasies and comic books and things like that. And I can't think of the word, but basically speaking, like the idea of like a Black person or a person of African descent having that type of power or having those type of guides to that power was so like minuscule as a kid, like, or if they did have that power, there's always like a great weakness, like that power came at a cost, or like they were sort of the sidekick, or they were the bad guy, or this or that. Like the idea of Black people having such a surreal power, or even being able to have a journey to getting that type of power was so, it was so little. And I'm not saying that people aren't fixing that now, obviously, but like it's still so minuscule to seeing those type of concepts and going back into Mulan and this idea of like ancestry and being able to call into ancestors and having a sort of power, because I feel like in doing so with the Lion King, like if these characters, they're animals, but they were obviously
Supposed to be
Africans,
right?
being able to acquire some sort of power, some sort of supernatural power, whether it be like a religious and spiritual power, a power system or something like
Mhm.
that, there would have to be an acknowledgement that like it is possible for folks of African descent to have that,
Yes,
which would then go against narratives that were set in stone by colonialism and imperialism, that like Black people and people of African descent's position is to be subservient.
Mhm.
And so now you're giving Black folks the tools in fiction, obviously in pop culture, to potentially liberate themselves. And to kind of quote someone from the show Atlanta, why would they fund their own demise at that point?
Right.
You're basically giving them the tools to beat you in the end. And as any of us know, if we've seen like the traditional hero story, like one of the big reasons why the bad guy loses in the end is because they tell them their evil plan or they give them the tools to defeat them. Why would they want to do that
yeah.
in actuality, I guess? But that's sort of my combination of a bunch of different things.
So there's a couple of things that I want to say. One, Voodoo played a tremendous part in the Haitian Revolution. Why? Why did it play a tremendous part? Because enslaved Africans were forced, as I told you, Le Code Noir, to show that they were Christians. They had to show that they were Catholic, right? So the syncretism that occurred in Haitian Voodoo is that the imagery is of the saints. But who they're calling on are African deities. Now, I want us to even think about Catholicism. Catholicism has within it ancestral worship. You go into any Catholic church, there are shrines to the different dead, whether it's Saint Peter, whether it's Mary, whether it's Paul, and you can light a candle, you can make an offering, a tithe, and say your prayer, and that dead person will assist you. Now, for Black people to be able to see their religion within that is because that religion came after their religion. As I said, traditional African religion is the mother. The same way that you can come from your mother and your mother can be very, very religious and you can say, well, you know what? I'm an atheist. But in respecting the mother, you know, when you go to her house, this is who she is. She wants you to come home for Christmas. You don't really believe in all this, but you always get her a gift, right? Because there's this place in which you respect the mother. What we see in a global sense is that we see tremendous disrespect, which has been termed as a type of anti-Blackness. When we think about ancestors can be revered for the Chinese, but for Black people, we can't even show it because then it's gonna be voodoo, right? And then if it's voodoo, then oh my God, then the Lion King movie could never be that popular. The Lion King play is still on Broadway. So in the sense of capital. Now, what I want us to also think about is the way in which this culture, even though it has been maligned and has been told that it's horrible, it has been commodified. It is over and over and over again. And so in thinking about the place in which, for me, that how did I get interested in this was because my parents came to the United States. They were Catholics in Haiti. They came here and then they became Jehovah's Witnesses. And Jehovah's Witnesses is something else, right? That's a whole other Christian experience. And I'll tell you quite honestly, I feel like most religions have cults, are cultish. They're all of them have elements of cults in it. Because there's always some type of mandate that some man, very few religions are inspired by women. So there's some man who's come out with something. And to be in here, you got to dress a certain kind of way. You got to cover your hair. You have to change your name. You have to pray this way 3 times a day, 5 times a day, whatever it is. You need to light incense. You need to, whatever it is, these are things that people have said came to them through vision, right? Came to them through some kind of way. When you read the narratives of the many Buddhas they all speak about the place of inspiration, whether it was through fasting that they then heard the voice of God. When you read, and praise be his name, Muhammad, right? What were the teachings of Muhammad? This is also inspired thought, right? Most of the Christian theologians, they also have a place of inspired thought, right? But we only seem to think that people within these spaces can be inspired. Yes.
Couple of things, we could talk all night long.
Yes.
Going back to your original question, part of the way that they do it is to make it consumable for us. They water it down, as you're describing with the Lion King example, with Rafiki,
Right.
and his utilizing
Exactly.
and his smearing of the fruit on we don't take it as voodoo, we just see it as something that this orangutan or whatever, I forget what it was, baboon
Right.
is
baboon.
doing.
Yes.
But we don't see it as a faith connection to it embedded. So it's been watered down for us to accept it. Then, when you also talk about the commodification of this, I'm sorry, my mind is going all over the place with what you're just going through. It'll come back to me. But you
Okay.
do have a comment from the chat as well.
Okay, yes.
In regards to Katie says, yes, interested in learning more about revenant depictions, understandings of voodoo. This is especially relevant since many of us are going to New Orleans next week for NCA, National Communication Association Annual Convention, where the destination branding centers some of the tourism options, the area's history of voodoo. How might we respectfully navigate this?
Right. So one of the things that I would say is go on the tours. Go on the tours. When I was in New Orleans, and I go to New Orleans quite a bit, it's one of my favorite places in the world. And I tell you quite honestly, I feel like I must have lived there in another life. Because the first time I went to New Orleans, I felt very comfortable, which is not always the thing, like when you're going down into the South, you know what I mean? One of the things that people often say about Louisiana and about New Orleans is that it doesn't feel like you're in the United States. People often say that they feel like they're in the Northern Caribbean. And there's a couple reasons for that. One thing that often people don't know is that the Louisiana Purchase was made in 1803. And it was made as a direct result of the Haitian Revolution. If the Haitian Revolution had not happened, why would France have sold that part of they owned it. They owned what is now a third of the United States. And so the only reason why it was sold is because France had been battling these Africans for 14 years, from 1791 until independence was declared on January 1st, 1804, the French were battling. The British, the Spanish, they were all involved trying to get these Africans to submit. And so going back to what you mentioned about voodoo and the Haitian Revolution, there was a ceremony, a Congress that happened August 14, 1791. At that Congress, there was an understanding that if these people were to be free, then they could not continue to worship the white man's God, because the white man's God had them enslaved. Many of them had memories of being free in Africa. Remember, everyone was not born into slavery. There were always these influx of Africans coming, and many of them refused to engage in this. And when I talked about the Maroons, where did they go? They went to the hills. They went to the Maroon village. They went outside. And of course, there were people that betrayed. Of course, there were spies and all of this. But at that Congress, there was an understanding that if we're going to do this, then we cannot be turning to their God. We can't turn to their God for our independence. We have to turn to our God, our ancestors, right? And so there's a prayer that you can look up. And actually, you can check out my podcast. It's called Voodoo Roots. It's on Spotify. And there's a prayer called Bookman's Prayer. Bookman was a imam, actually. They say that he was a Muslim and that he had traveled from Jamaica and was there. And that's the other thing I want you to understand is the inter-island exchanges that were happening. It was not, the Haitian Revolution was not just about Haiti. the suppression that happened for the West, the reason why Haiti is still spoken of in such a negative way is based upon what happened in 1804. Like it's at the core, it is this feeling of anger and rage that these people who we saw as subhuman, have declared independence and have kicked us out. Yes.
That's what my other point was gonna be when you were talking about,
Oh, yes.
well, I did a piece on Spartacus
Oh,
in connection to his seeing and hearing of visions that supposedly, how he's depicted in mass
exactly,
media.
yep,
Supposedly had these visions, these thoughts of
Yes.
freeing slaves, likening that to,
Nat Turner,
thank you.
Yes.
My mind was likening that to Nat Turner, because of the same description,
same
thing,
description,
but how he vilified
that's
in
right,
this concept of trying to liberate in horrendous types of approaches, but it's very similar
it's
to
very
the
similar.
rebellions of Spartacus.
Exactly.
But then one of the things that I found interesting when doing the research to get this prepared was that in all of human existence, at least the anthropologists and the scholars that study slavery and rebellions, the only rebellion to be deemed or considered successful is that of Toussaint Louverture in Haiti, to have
That's
actually
Saline,
liberated
because
this.
Toussaint was dead. Yes,
But to your point,
yes,
how we
exactly.
vilified this particular country, that individual, even though he may be glorified in some spaces, but for the most part, just wiped away from the history books in a lot of ways.
Wiped away from the history books and is not taught in France. The Haitian Revolution is not taught in France. You have your hand up, yes.
Okay, two things. First thing, Boukman is the one who was burned by the stake, and they said that he came back as a mosquito or something like that.
I don't know about that.
I don't, or that might have been a rumor, so that's my mistake. for
Okay,
one.
it's okay. 'Cause there's
I'm
always
trying to make
something-
sure I got them all right, because when
Okay.
you said Boukman, like, I know who that is, but I need to
Yes.
make sure I got.
So
the
there's
right person.
Makandal, I believe.
That might have been
I
Makanda.
think Makandal was burned, yes.
Okay, and then
He
the
came-
second,
Yeah, go ahead.
my bad, my apologies, I want you to finish.
Feel free. We're all students here.
Okay. And then my second point, goes back, kind of, I think a pop culture aspect of it, maybe, and I'm thinking of like how some of the first depictions of voodoo were like in the United States were some of the first zombie movies
Yes,
that came out in the early 20th century.
they
so-
emerge at the time of the US occupation. So it's tied, it's very specific, it's very intentional. The reason why we think of Haiti a particular way is because it was intentionally done. The US occupation happened from 1914 to 1932, or yeah, around that, or I'm not sure exactly when it ended, but it was at that time where there was an influx. Like, I want you to think about something. The way that we think about Haiti and the condition it's in right now. I saw a news article that said that gangs are shooting at planes trying to land, and that there's no flights coming in, all this type of bedlam, right? That we're seeing those images. There's a reason why we're always going to get those negative images. Because the other side of it is that it's actually a gorgeous country, right? After Haiti's earthquake, the fact that people were in such a horrible state, like the images that the media shared, right, were frightening. It was horrifying. I went to Haiti 3 weeks after the earthquake, and my greatest fear is that I would see a dead body. Because see, death, zombies, and all of that is how the image of Haiti is all tied up. You have president-elects that can say things about us, right? That can say things that are grossly untrue, but because those images are already deeply embedded in our psyche, they're like, well, I don't know, shit, could be true. I don't know, who knows, So that place in which, because of wanting to create a negative imagery about a place in which the United States invaded. The United States came and stole Haiti's gold. Haiti had gold. They came with the military, displaced the elected officials, put in their puppet government, and that has been the state that Haiti has been suffering from, is that outside intervention. When the earthquake happened, the West decided we need to bring the UN. Why was the UN there? The UN soldiers were engaged in horrible acts of violence and rape. a lot of the people that were living in tents, the women, that what was happening, men, women, and children being raped by the UN, but also what happened with the Clintons and the Bush Foundation that went to Haiti. What were they doing there? Why did Obama allow them to enter Haiti during this fragile time? And Hillary Clinton's brother was able to go and do what? If it is such a horrible place, why is it always still coming up? Why is it still? Because it's has one of the richest sources of iridium, right? And you can check and look that up. And what is that used for? Like, look into it and see and also what's interesting is seeing that though Haiti says it has this source, when you look it up on the internet, right? It's like, no, they don't, just, in the sense of a natural resource, like who's listed of having iridium? Haiti is not. I mean, there's so much to it, but anyway, there was another question that someone had, and I'm not sure if I answered it. But what I also wanted to talk about was, which is in the sense of one of the biggest stars, right? She has, in Beyonce and pop culture, she has made references to Oshun and the Orishas for a long time, and even her husband, right? So when he talks about the twins, I forgot which song it is, but then she talks about, she's Oshun and her sister's repping Yemanja. She talks about Ogun. There's all of these different deities. And so what is interesting is that and you can find people who are Christians talking about, well, you want to follow beyond Beyonce, but she's a witch. So there's a lot of talk of her doing witchcraft at her shows. There's talk of her, coming out and wearing all of this yellow and gold, and what does it mean? And so I don't have time to show it, but you can easily find people breaking down all of her songs and talking about which Orisha, what is she representing? What is she doing? And the place in which those that consider themselves to be Christian feel uncomfortable. They feel uncomfortable with this because they feel that it's evil, it's negative.
I will ask this, just throw this into the conversation, like, to your point, because like there's a whole gossip in the Illuminati thing with Beyonce and Jay, based upon things of that nature.
Right.
But then I also wonder how many of us seek to adopt that or, utilize it, but maybe not fully appreciate what those deities are, appreciate the connection to. So, just in kind of like, have we commercialized it in some ways or, mistreated it?
Absolutely. And in many ways we have. I mean, right now, unfortunately, there are so many folks that are taking their DNA test. They're finding out where their connections are. And they want to go and see. They want to go to Ghana. They want to go to Cameroon. They want to go to Benin, right? Actually, Benin right now is offering citizenship to folks who can prove through their DNA test that they come from Benin. And I don't know what percentage you need but they're offering citizenship, which is very interesting, especially when we think about this Back to Africa movement that is growing. It's growing. It started definitely, we can say it started with Marcus Garvey, right? But it started even before that. It started with enslaved Africans on Sapelo Island, who when they landed, they said, not for us. And they turned around and they say that they walked on water. We know that they didn't walk on water. We know that they turned around and drowned. That's the first Back to Africa movement, right? The Back to Africa is also in the sense of a spirituality, in the sense of a dream and a vision and a place of freedom. So people said, I will not be enslaved. And they turned around and committed mass suicide. That's the first Back to Africa movement. What we have right now is we have people that are in a state of fear. Project 2025 has caused many people to think about, what's going to happen? Am I welcome here as a Black person? They're talking about they're going to take this away. They're talking this, they're talking that, right? There's all of these fears. So even when you're looking at things on social media, you're not really sure, is this even a site a Black person has created, or is this just part of the propaganda to get more Black people to say, I have to leave? right? So that if there were any reparations paid to those that descended here and that their ancestors contributed to the Industrial Revolution, when would you ever get that?
Start a whole talk right there.
Right? So I wanted to share with you that that even though that for many of us, we can be open and we can understand that there are many different traditional beliefs, you know, that there are folks in Brazil that are being attacked, the traditional shrines and temples. And in Brazil, it's called candomblé. And it's basically the Orishas, right? It's practiced by Black and brown people in Brazil, and their temples are being trashed. People are being beaten, arrested, because there's this whole evangelical movement that is taking over. And that can happen in it repeats itself over and over. And the scapegoating. I want to play something here, and y'all tell me if you know what this is, you know. Yeah. Just take a listen.
Dad,
Huh?
sometimes I hear sounds at night and I get scared. I think there's a ghost in my closet.
Now you listen to me, son. There is no such thing as ghosts. Case closed.
So what's real but scary?
You really want to know the one thing you should be afraid of?
Yes, I really do.
Voodoo.
Voodoo?
Yes, voodoo. That will mess you up. And it is 100% real. Promise me that you'll never go to Haiti.
I promise, Dad.
This was good. I enjoyed spending time with you.
Me too, Dad.
Oh, and hey, do you want to go to Haiti sometime?
No.
Good. Good.
What did you tell him?
I didn't tell him anything.
He hasn't slept for 4 days, Ron. Everywhere we go, he asks me if we're going to Haiti. What does that even mean?
I am so sick and tired that you've sheltered him from the evils of voodoo.
So when I started the conversation about belonging and alienation and growing up and people not even knowing where my family's country was, right? And this was not necessarily something that I grew up with, but this is representative of the type of media that was always around, right? So I'm a daughter of the 70s, so definitely by the 80s, Angel Heart, all of the different Serpent in the Rainbow, all of these things. And so the evilness, the unkindness, the place in which it's like, oh my God, this evil person, right? It's always Black. The anti-Blackness that exists in mainstream media always vilifies Black and brown people. We're either the villain or we're the mammy. We're either suckling the world and they're on our tits and we're taking care of everything, or we're the destruction and we're the evil. And what I say to you when we think about what you understand to be true and what you believe that you know is take the time to step out of the fear. Because fear, there's an acronym for fear, which is false evidence appearing real. Well, we understand that when we see something and hear something, there's a place within our psychology and within our body that we take it to be real. We have to work on processing that it's not true, right? Before we say something and that feeling of that hesitation, it's like, well, let me just investigate, right? That's a big part of the work that I do. That's even the reason why I wanted to go on this pilgrimage. The pilgrimage for me was one in which I was wondering, that my interrogation, which I wasn't sure, I don't know if I really explained it, is that I wanted to see how have traditional African religions survived. So from Brooklyn to the southern parts of the United States, like, you know, as you saw in the film, the different places. So part of the journey was a road trip. So I had a road trip from Brooklyn all the way to Punta Gorda, Belize. So traveling with two other folks and traveling throughout the Americas, traveling through Texas, Mexico, and then Belize, and through that journey, looking and meeting with people who were traditionalists or practitioners. And then after that trip, then I was able to go to IET, and I was able to go attend ceremonies and go and meet and talk and do research. And then after that, I was able to go to Benin. And I went to Benin and I went to the Voodoo Festival. Sorry, I don't know what I'm doing. I clicked the wrong thing. Somehow I clicked that. Let me close this.
How many other countries have practiced the voodoo religion in Africa? Or are there?
Yeah, I
Are
would
there
say that
other
traditional religion, you can find it throughout.
Yeah.
I would say Northern Africa has, definitely has its tradition, but it's heavily Muslim, right? So, and then when you look at the Muslim traditions that are practiced in West Africa, the expression of Islam is different than North Africa, right? And the way that the women are, like when you look at West African tradition and Muslim, the women may cover their hair, they may not, how they're tied to their traditional beliefs, the place in syncretism that occurs there. Southern Africa, they have their traditions, right? And then Eastern Africa, you know, from Christianity in the north with Ethiopia, but Ethiopia also has its own tradition. So that's just one. Christianity is the largest, Islam is next, and then their traditional religion. So they're called different things, but really every nation has it. I wanted to highlight Benin because Benin is the only country that I know of on the whole continent of Africa, and Africa is huge, that actually has a federal holiday. They have a federal holiday for traditional religion. So they have the federal holidays for Islam, they have federal holidays for Christianity, and the president in the early 90s, I believe, instituted this holiday. And so January 10th is Voodoo Day in Benin, and there's lots of festivals. Now, there's festivals throughout the continent, but in the sense of it being an official holiday that you get off and you get paid,
Yeah.
there, you know, that hasn't happened. So, yes.
Two things came to mind with that clip that you played. One, when you talked about Serpent and the Rainbow, Angel Heart movies of the 80s, keeping in mind the era that we were in also with the moral authority of that Reagan era. And
Exactly. Voodoo economics, right?
Exactly. With the economics at play. And then also with that clip, you made me think about wordplay and how we utilize certain words. So Haiti, very closely sounding to the Greek Hades in terms of the guy that ruled the underworld. And so when the mother says, he's asking, are we going to Hades? There's like, there's this resonating effect of, are we going to hell? Are we going to die? Type of thing.
Exactly. Intentional. And that was from Anchorman. It said it at the top. So that was from Anchorman. I remember when I saw that clip, I was like, how random is that? Like what? Like, I don't even think that was in the script. I think that he just made that up. And it's like, but what? Like, again, the randomness in which people can be attacked. Like, you know, like just people trying to survive out here, but yet how we're portrayed in the way. And so I just, we can talk for a long time. It is 3:38. And so I wanna stop here. I think I wanna stop with this quote. Hold on, let me go back. So this is another film that I worked on. This is African Odyssey, Ancestral Memories. When I was living in Benin, this was a film that I worked on, and this was shot on a short film. These are the festivals in which films have been shown.
Is that your film?
Yeah, this is
African
mine.
Odyssey too?
Yeah, that's another film of mine. That one's with some, that one is it's not featuring me, but I worked as a producer and assistant director on this one. Yeah, and this one's also on YouTube. And then this is the podcast. You can find that on Spotify. Where's the quote that I want to end with? I want to end with this quote. And then if we have any other
Can I
questions.
take a picture of the African Odyssey?
Sure, hold on.
Okay.
All right. And I want to end with this quote. This is from Aikwe Armaz, 2000 Seasons. We must remember to remember. Remember this, against all that destruction, some yet remained among us, unforgetful of origins, dreaming secret dreams, seeing secret visions, hearing secret voices of our purpose. So, thank you.
Thank you, Regina. GG, it was awesome. Folks in Zoom, thank you for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and close Zoom and stop the recording. And just as a reminder, all of these seminars and programs, so if you want to revisit anything that Gigi talked about or the titles of her films, we do post the recordings to the Pop Culture Ideas website, so you can find that through our communication department webpage as well. All right, folks, have a great rest of your Friday and weekend.
All right. I see some comments from Amanda. Thank you. And thanks for everybody for joining in.